Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. 45 years. That's how long I punched the clock. 45 years of early mornings, of lukewarm coffee tasting faintly of burnt plastic from the office machine, of fluorescent lights humming a monotonous tune above my head. 45 years of deadlines, of quarterly reports, of the low-grade persistent stress that settles in your bones like damp. And through it all, there was a single, shimmering image I held in my mind's eye, a beacon that guided me through the drudgery. It was the image of retirement. But it wasn't just about not working. It was about retirement with Elena. Our golden years, we called them. A cliché, I know, but it felt apt. We had spent a lifetime forging the gold, hammering it out through long hours, through raising two children who were now off living their own busy lives, through the thousand small sacrifices that marriage demands. Now was the time to enjoy its luster. I had it all mapped out, a detailed itinerary for the rest of our lives. We'd travel, not the frantic two-week-a-year vacations we used to take, where you spend the first week decompressing and the second week dreading the return. No, this would be slow travel. We'd rent a small villa in Tuscany for a month, learning to cook the local dishes, drinking wine that didn't come from a box. We'd take a river cruise down the Danube, watching ancient castles drift by. We finally see the cherry blossoms in Japan, something Elena had dreamed of since she was a girl. I imagined our days falling into a comfortable, easy rhythm. Mornings spent in the garden I had meticulously planned for years. I had the seed catalogs, pages dog-eared and marked with my scribbled notes. Heirloom tomatoes for Elena's sauce. Peonies, her favorite. Afternoons would be for our hobbies. I'd get back to my woodworking, the scent of sawdust and varnish filling the garage, while Elena would be at her pottery wheel, her hands covered in clay, creating something beautiful from a lump of earth. We'd take long walks, hand in hand, like we did when we were first dating. Our steps slower now, our hair grayer, but the comfortable silence between us just the same. Evenings would be quiet. A home-cooked meal, a glass of good whiskey for me, a crisp Sauvignon Blanc for her. We'd sit on the porch swing I'd just finished installing, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. We wouldn't need to talk much. After 50 years together, we had our own language, a shorthand of shared glances and knowing smiles. The first few months were exactly that, a perfect, blissful realization of the dream. My retirement party was a blur of bad cake and well wishes from people I'd likely never see again. The next Monday, while the rest of the world was groaning at their alarm clocks, Elena and I had breakfast in bed. We laughed, feeling like rebellious teenagers skipping school. We booked our first big trip, a 3-week tour of the national parks out west. We bought new hiking boots and matching windbreakers. We felt young again, giddy with the sheer, unadulterated freedom of it all. Time was no longer our master, it was our playground. Our house, the one we'd lived in for 30 years, the one that had echoed with the laughter and tears of our children, settled into a new kind of quiet, a peaceful quiet. It was the backdrop to our new life. And next door, there was Mark. Mark and his wife, Carol. They'd moved in about 5 years ago. He was a bit younger than us, a decade or so, a loud, bluff man who always seemed to be hosting a barbecue. We were friendly in that suburban, neighborly way. We'd wave from across our lawns, borrow a cup of sugar, bring in each other's mail when one of us was away. Mark was always offering to help. "Hey, Frank, let me give you a hand with that ladder. Elena, if you need anything from the hardware store, just give a yell." I thought he was just a good neighbor, a bit overbearing at times with his booming laugh and backslapping bonhominy, but harmless. The first sign, the first tiny crack in the foundation of my perfect world, was so small I barely registered it. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about 6 months into my retirement. I was in the garage sanding a piece of oak for a bookshelf I was making for the living room. The garage door was open to the warm afternoon air. Elena had said she was going to the library. I needed a specific grit of sandpaper and realized I was out. I decided to walk to the hardware store, a pleasant 20-minute stroll. As I came around the corner of our street, I saw them. Elena's car wasn't in the direction of the library. It was parked 2 blocks over, on a quiet side street lined with jacaranda trees. And Mark's truck was parked right behind it. I stopped, a cold, prickling sensation crawling up my spine. It was strange. Why would they be parked here? Maybe they'd run into each other and were just chatting. But why park so far from either of their houses? I stood there for a moment, hidden behind a large oak tree, feeling like a spy in my own life. Then I saw them. They got out of their respective vehicles. Mark walked over to Elena's car, and she got out. He said something, and she laughed. It wasn't her usual laugh, the one that crinkled the corners of her eyes. This was different, a little breathless, a little girlish. He leaned in, his hand on the roof of her car, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was going to kiss her. But he just said something else, then laughed his booming laugh and walked back to his truck. Elena got back in her car and drove off. A minute later, he did the same. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I tried to reason with myself. It was nothing, a coincidence. Maybe his truck had broken down and she'd stopped to help. Maybe they were planning a surprise party for Carol. My mind scrambled for a plausible explanation, anything to erase the sick feeling that had taken root in my stomach. I walked home, the sandpaper forgotten. When Elena came home an hour later, she was humming. She had a stack of books from the library. "Look, Frank," she said, holding up a glossy cookbook. "Tuscan recipes. I thought we could try some before our trip." She was cheerful, normal, my Elena. I wanted to ask her, "Did you see Mark today?" But the words caught in my throat. What if I was wrong? I'd sound like a jealous, paranoid old man. I had no proof of anything. Just a strange feeling, a fleeting image that was probably nothing. So I said nothing. I just smiled and told her the cookbook looked wonderful. But that night, as she slept soundly beside me, her breathing soft and even, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying that scene over and over in my mind. The way he leaned in, the sound of her laugh. Life went on. The days fell back into their comfortable rhythm. We gardened, we cooked, we planned our trips. The bookshelf I was building started to take shape. But the seed of doubt had been planted. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way Elena's phone, which used to lie on the kitchen counter for hours untouched, was now always with her, either in her pocket or face down on the end table beside her. The extra care she started taking with her appearance. She'd always been a handsome woman, but now there were new perfumes, a different shade of lipstick, trips to the hairdresser that seemed more frequent. "Just want to look nice for my handsome retired husband," she'd say with a smile, and I'd feel a fresh wave of guilt for my suspicions. And then there was Mark. He seemed to be over at our house more often. "Just saw you were weeding, Elena. Thought I'd bring over my electric tiller, make it easier for you." Or, "Hey, Frank, got a couple of extra steaks for the grill. Figured you two might want them." His presence, which I'd once found merely boisterous, now felt intrusive, charged with a meaning I couldn't quite decipher. I'd watch him interact with Elena, looking for a sign, a flicker of something in their eyes. But they were always perfectly appropriate, the very model of friendly neighbors. I told myself I was going crazy, that 45 years of work had finally broken my brain, and I was seeing shadows where there was only sunlight. The breaking point came on a Thursday. It was our 50th wedding anniversary. Our kids had thrown us a beautiful party the weekend before, a catered affair in our backyard with all our friends and family. It was wonderful. But our actual anniversary, we decided, would be just for us. I'd planned a special day. We drove out to the coast, to the same little cove where I'd proposed to her all those years ago. We had a picnic, just like we did then. I gave her my gift, a simple gold locket. Inside, I'd put a tiny picture of us from our wedding day, and on the other side, a recent photo from our retirement party, a bookend to our life together. She cried when she opened it. "Oh, Frank," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's beautiful. I love you so much." And in that moment, looking into her tear-filled eyes, I felt ashamed of my doubts. This was my Elena, my wife of 50 years, the love of my life. The shadows in my mind receded. That evening, we had reservations at our favorite restaurant. Elena went upstairs to get ready. She was taking a long time. I was in the living room, tying my tie, feeling happier and more at peace than I had in months. I heard her phone buzz on the end table. Normally, I would have ignored it, but the screen lit up and I saw the name, Mark, and a message preview that read, "Can't stop thinking about this afternoon. You were." The rest was cut off. The world tilted on its axis. The air in the room grew thick and heavy, and I couldn't seem to draw a proper breath. It was like being plunged into ice water. A roaring sound filled my ears. I picked up the phone. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely unlock it. Her passcode was our wedding date. The irony was a physical blow. I opened the messages, and there it was. My entire life, the last 50 years, the future I had so meticulously planned, all of it turned to ash in the glow of a 4-inch screen. There were hundreds of messages, texts going back months, explicit, loving, filled with plans and private jokes. They talked about everything, their secret meetings, their stolen moments. They had a whole other life, a secret history that had been running parallel to mine, completely invisible to me. There were photos of him shirtless in his garage, photos of her in a new lingerie set I'd never seen, posing in what looked like a cheap motel room. A selfie of the two of them, their heads close together, smiling, taken in his truck. The date stamp was from the Tuesday I'd seen him parked on a side street. He had kissed her that day after I'd looked away. And the message from this afternoon, our anniversary? Can't stop thinking about this afternoon. You were incredible. Happy anniversary to us. This afternoon. While I was packing our picnic basket, she'd been with him. While I was reminiscing about our proposal, she was creating a new, sordid memory with our neighbor. The locket I had given her, the symbol of our 50 years, suddenly felt like a cheap, hollow piece of tin. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She was humming that same tune she'd been humming the day she came back from the library. She walked into the living room, a vision in a new blue dress, her hair perfectly styled, a radiant smile on her face. "How do I look?" she asked, doing a little twirl. I couldn't speak. I could only hold up the phone, the screen glowing with their filth. I watched her face as she saw what I was holding. The radiant smile didn't just fade, it collapsed. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a waxy pale mask. Her eyes, the eyes I had loved and trusted for half a century, widened in sheer animal panic. "Frank," she stammered, her voice a strangled whisper. "Frank, it's not, I can explain." But there was nothing to explain. The evidence was right there, a digital testament to her betrayal. The dream was over. The golden years I had worked my entire life for had been a lie, a gilded cage I hadn't even realized I was in. And the person who held the key, the person I had trusted with my entire world, had just let the monster in. The humming from the fluorescent lights at the office for all those years seemed like a sweet melody to the deafening silence that now filled our home. It was the sound of a life breaking. It was the sound of my heart turning to stone. The silence that followed was a living thing. It was heavier than any argument, louder than any scream. It filled the space between us, pressing down on me, suffocating me. Elena stood frozen, her hand half raised as if to take the phone, to somehow snatch the truth out of the air and stuff it back into its digital prison. Her face, which moments before had been a portrait of anniversary joy, was now a canvas of pure horror. She looked like a stranger. In the 50 years we had been together, through sickness, through financial hardship, through the trials of raising children, I had never seen that look on her face. It was the look of someone caught, cornered, exposed. It was the look of a liar. "Frank, please," she finally managed, the words barely audible. "Let me talk, please." I wanted to rage. I wanted to smash the phone against the wall, to shatter it into a million pieces, as if that could somehow shatter the reality it had revealed. I wanted to scream at her, to ask her the one-word question that was burning a hole in my soul. Why? But my throat was constricted, my muscles locked. All I could do was stand there, the phone in my hand feeling like a venomous snake, and stare at the woman I thought I knew. The blue dress she wore, the one I had admired just seconds ago, now seemed garish, a costume for a part she was playing in a sordid play I had no idea I was the audience for. I slowly lowered the phone and placed it on the coffee table, a deliberate, almost ceremonial act. The movement felt sluggish, like I was moving through water. I sank onto the sofa, the one we had picked out together, the one where our grandchildren had built forts with the cushions. Every object in the room, every photograph on the mantelpiece, every piece of furniture suddenly felt like a prop from a different life, a life that had ended the moment I read that text message. "Talk," I said, and my voice was unrecognizable. It was a dry, rasping sound, devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of a hollow man. And so she began, the explanation. It was a torrent of words, a desperate, chaotic flood of excuses, justifications, and pleas for understanding. It wasn't what I thought. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake, a terrible, stupid mistake. The words tumbled out of her, tripping over each other in their haste. She said she was lonely. Lonely? How could she be lonely? We had just retired. We were together, all day, every day. It was the very thing we had been working towards our entire lives. She said I wasn't paying her enough attention. She claimed I was so wrapped up in my workshop and my garden plans that I had drifted away from her. The accusation was so preposterous, so patently false, that a bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. My workshop? My garden? Everything I was doing, every nail I hammered, every seed I planted was for us, for the life I thought we were building together. She talked about Mark, how he was just there, how he listened to her. He would stop by when I was in the garage, she said. He'd have a coffee with her in the kitchen. He'd compliment her on her dress, on her hair. He made her feel seen. That was the word she used, seen. As if for the past 50 years I had been looking right through her. As if the life we had shared, the children we had raised, the home we had built was some sort of invisibility cloak she had been forced to wear. The story unfolded, a grotesque tapestry of deceit. It had started with conversations, flirtatious banter over the fence. Then came the coffees in our kitchen, my kitchen. He'd sit at the table where my children had eaten their breakfast, where we had paid our bills and planned our vacations, and he'd woo my wife while I was 100 feet away, sanding a piece of wood for our home. Then the text started. Innocent at first, she claimed, just jokes and friendly check-ins. But they escalated, growing more intimate, more suggestive, until they became the filth I had read on her phone. The first time they were physical, she told me through choked sobs, was that Tuesday, the day I saw them parked on the side street. She had agreed to meet him for a drive, just to talk, she insisted, but they had ended up in a cheap motel on the other side of town. She described the room in excruciating detail, the threadbare carpet, the lingering smell of stale cigarettes, the flickering neon sign outside the window. She painted a picture of a tawdry, pathetic encounter, as if the ugliness of the setting somehow mitigated the ugliness of the act, as if confessing the sordid details would somehow make me feel pity for her instead of the gut-wrenching revulsion that was churning inside me. And our anniversary, this afternoon, she had told me she was going to get her hair done for our dinner. Instead, she had driven straight to that same motel to be with him, on the day we were supposed to be celebrating a half-century of love and commitment. The locket I had given her was still around her neck. I could see it, glinting in the lamplight. The thought that she might have been wearing it while she was with him made me physically ill. I had to get up and walk to the bathroom, where I retched into the toilet until there was nothing left but bitter bile. When I came back, she was sitting on the floor, weeping. "I was going to end it, Frank," she said, her voice raw. "I swear I was. I knew it was wrong. I hate myself for it. It just got out of control. But her words were meaningless. They were just noise. The trust, the very bedrock of our 50 years together, had been pulverized. It wasn't just the physical act of sex with another man. It was the lies, the monumental, systematic deception she had orchestrated for months. Every I love you, every shared meal, every walk we had taken, every night we had spent in the same bed was now tainted, retroactively poisoned by her secret. I began to look back over the past year, and it was like my memories were being re-edited by a malicious director. Her sudden interest in long walks alone, was she meeting him? The hushed phone calls she would end abruptly when I entered the room, were they with him? The unexplained credit card bill for a lingerie shop I didn't recognize, was that for the items in the photos she'd sent him? It was a dizzying, nauseating spiral of doubt. My own past had become a lie. The worst part, the part that twisted the knife deeper than anything else, was that it was Mark. Not some anonymous stranger she met in a bar, not a long-lost love from her past. It was our neighbor. The man whose lawnmower I could hear from my kitchen window. The man I had to see every single day. The man whose stupid booming laugh would now be a constant, torturous reminder of my wife's betrayal. Our home, my sanctuary, the place I had longed to retreat to in my retirement, had been transformed into a prison. A torture chamber where I would be forced to confront my cuckolding every time I stepped outside to get the mail. I didn't go to dinner that night. I told her to cancel the reservation. I couldn't bear the thought of sitting across a table from her, making small talk, pretending that our world hadn't just ended. I slept in the guest room. Or rather, I lay in the guest room bed, staring into the darkness, my mind an echo chamber of her words and the images from her phone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, Elena and Mark, in his truck, in that motel room, in my kitchen. The images were relentless, branded on the inside of my eyelids. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. She had made breakfast, my favorite, bacon and scrambled eggs. She brought a tray to the guest room door. "Frank," she said softly, "can I come in?" I told her to leave it outside the door. I couldn't look at her. The sight of her performing these mundane acts of domesticity, acts that had once been a source of comfort and love, now felt like a grotesque parody. She was playing the part of the devoted wife, but the performance was over. I had seen behind the curtain. The days that followed were a living hell. We moved around the house like ghosts, communicating only in clipped, necessary sentences. "I'm going to the store. The plumber is coming at 10. The silence was a constant accusation. The air was thick with unspoken words, with grief and anger, and a pain so profound it felt physical. I lost my appetite. I couldn't sleep. I'd wander the house at night, ending up in my workshop, the half-finished bookshelf mocking me with its promise of a future that would never be. I couldn't bring myself to work on it. The joy was gone, replaced by a deep, gnawing emptiness. And every day I had to see him, Mark. He'd be out washing his car or grilling on his patio or playing catch with his son. He'd wave at me, a cheerful, oblivious gesture. "Morning, Frank," he'd yell, his voice carrying across the manicured lawns. And I would just stand there, paralyzed by a mixture of white-hot rage and icy humiliation. He knew what he had done. He had slept with my wife in our anniversary, and now he was waving at me as if we were the best of friends. The audacity of it was breathtaking. I fantasized about confronting him, about landing a single satisfying punch on his smug, grinning face. But what would that accomplish? It wouldn't erase the betrayal. It wouldn't restore my marriage. It would just turn our private tragedy into a public spectacle for the whole neighborhood to gossip about. Elena tried to talk to me. She'd approach me, her eyes red and swollen from crying, and she'd start to apologize again. She'd tell me she loved me, that I was the only man she had ever truly loved. She begged me for forgiveness. But I had nothing to give her. I was an empty vessel. The man she had known, the loving, trusting husband, was gone. In his place was this shell of a man, filled with nothing but cold, hard anger and a pain that had taken up permanent residence in his chest. One afternoon, I was sitting on the porch swing, staring blankly at the garden we had planted together. The peonies were just starting to bloom, her favorite. I saw Carol, Mark's wife, walking over. My stomach clenched. Did she know? Was I about to be drawn into an even bigger, messier drama? She was holding a casserole dish. "Hi, Frank," she said, her smile warm, but her eyes full of a sadness I hadn't noticed before. "I made lasagna. I know things must be difficult right now. I just wanted you to know I'm thinking of you." She knew. Elena must have told Mark, and Mark must have told her. Or maybe she'd found out on her own. It didn't matter. The secret was out. The shame was no longer just mine and Elena's to bear. It had seeped through the walls of our house and was now poisoning the ground around us. "He's a fool, Frank," Carol said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's a fool who doesn't know what he has. I'm so sorry." She placed the lasagna on the table beside me and walked away, leaving me there with her pity and her kindness, which somehow felt worse than the anger. The affair hadn't just destroyed my marriage, it had destroyed hers too. 2 families, 2 homes, 2 futures, all shattered by the selfish, reckless actions of 2 people who had thought only of themselves. I looked at the peonies, their delicate pink petals unfurling in the afternoon sun. They were beautiful, and I felt absolutely nothing. The days bled into one another, a monotonous gray landscape of grief and anger. The house, once a symbol of our shared life and future, became a mausoleum. Every room was haunted by the ghost of what we used to be. I'd walk into the kitchen and see Elena standing at the stove, humming as she cooked, and for a split second, everything would feel normal. Then the memory would curdle, replaced by the image of her sitting at that same kitchen table, laughing with him, her back to me as I worked in the garage. I started to eat my meals alone, either in my workshop or on the back porch, unable to sit across from her and pretend. The simple act of sharing a meal, a ritual we had performed tens of thousands of times over 50 years, was now an unbearable intimacy. I tried to escape into my hobbies, the very things that were supposed to be the cornerstones of my peaceful retirement. I'd go into the workshop, the smell of cedar and pine that once brought me such satisfaction, now doing nothing to soothe my frayed nerves. I'd pick up a tool, my hands remembering the familiar weight and balance, but my mind would be a million miles away. I'd find myself just standing there, a piece of wood in the vise, staring at the wall, my thoughts caught in a relentless loop. Elena and Mark, the motel room, the text messages, the lies. I couldn't focus. The intricate work of joinery, the precision and patience it required, was beyond me. My hands, which had once been so steady, now trembled with a rage that had no outlet. I eventually stopped going in there altogether. The half-finished bookshelf became a monument to my shattered dreams, gathering dust in the corner. The garden was even worse. It was a collaboration, a shared space we had designed together. Her roses, my vegetables. Her peonies, my tomato plants. Now, when I looked at it, I saw only betrayal. I remembered her kneeling in the dirt, her face smudged with soil, looking up at me and smiling. "It's going to be beautiful, Frank," she'd said, and it was. But its beauty was now a cruel mockery. It was a living, breathing reminder of the lie she was living while we planted those seeds. One sweltering afternoon, driven by a surge of impotent fury, I took a spade and hacked down the peony bushes, their vibrant pink and white blossoms falling to the ground like severed heads. I didn't stop until they were nothing but a pile of mangled stems and leaves. I stood there, breathing heavily, my heart pounding, the spade handle slick with sweat in my hands. But the rage wasn't sated. The destruction brought me no release, only a profound and bottomless despair. Telling story, watched from the kitchen window, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't say a word. What was there to say? We were both architects of this desolation. Sleep offered no respite. I continued to stay in the guest room, but the nights were long and torturous. I'd lie awake for hours, my mind replaying the greatest hits of her infidelity. I became an obsessive detective of my own past, sifting through memories, re-examining them for clues I had missed. That weekend trip she took with her sister last year, did she really go with her sister? The work emergency Mark had one night when Carol was out of town. The same night Elena said she had a migraine and went to bed early. Was that a coincidence? My mind constructed elaborate, painful scenarios, each one more vivid and more plausible than the last. I was torturing myself, I knew that, but I couldn't stop. It was as if by understanding the full scope of her deception, I could somehow contain it, control it. But it was useless. The betrayal was a cancer, and it had metastasized, infecting every part of my life, past, present, and future. When I did manage to sleep, the nightmares came. Sometimes I dreamed that I was in that motel room with them, a helpless, invisible observer. I'd hear their laughter, their whispered words, see their bodies entwined. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, the images so real that it took me several minutes to realize it was just a dream. Other nights, I'd dream of our wedding day. I'd see Elena walking down the aisle towards me, beautiful and radiant in her white dress, and I'd feel that same surge of overwhelming love I had felt 50 years ago. But as she got closer, I'd see that it wasn't me she was smiling at. It was Mark, standing behind me, and she would walk right past me and into his arms. I would wake from these dreams with a sob caught in my throat, the sense of loss so profound it felt like a physical weight on my chest. My physical health began to suffer. I lost weight. A persistent, dull ache settled in my gut. My doctor told me it was stress. He prescribed sleeping pills and suggested I see a therapist. I took the pills, but they only plunged me into a heavy, dreamless stupor that left me feeling groggy and disconnected the next day. I refused to see a therapist. How could I talk about this to a stranger? How could I put into words the depth of this humiliation, the shame of being the old fool whose wife had left him for the younger, more exciting neighbor? It was a private agony, a wound so deep and so personal that exposing it to the air felt like an impossibility. Our children knew something was wrong. We had always been a close family. We talked to our son and daughter on the phone every week. But now our conversations were strained. I was evasive, monosyllabic. Elena would force a cheerful tone, but her voice was brittle, and I knew the kids could hear it. Finally, our daughter Sarah called me one evening. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "You and Mom sound distant. Did you have a fight?" I couldn't lie to her, not my Sarah, so I told her. The words came out in a halting, broken whisper. I told her about Mark, about the texts, about the anniversary. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with a cold fury I had never heard from her before. "She did what?" she said, the words like chips of ice. "With Mark? That sleazy? I'm coming home." She arrived the next day. The confrontation between her and Elena was brutal. Sarah, who had always been a quiet, gentle soul, unleashed a torrent of rage and recrimination at her mother. She called her a liar, a hypocrite, a selfish old woman who had thrown away 50 years of love for a cheap thrill. Elena just sat there and took it, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I should have felt some sort of vindication, some satisfaction in seeing Elena confronted with the pain she had caused. But I just felt tired, so incredibly tired. The drama was exhausting. The anger was a heavy cloak I couldn't seem to shrug off. My son Michael had a different reaction. He was angry, yes, But his anger was directed more at the situation than at his mother. He was practical. "Dad, what are you going to do?" he asked me. "Are you going to divorce her?" Divorce. The word hung in the air, ugly and final. 50 years. Could you just erase 50 years? We had built a life together, an empire of shared experiences and assets. Our house, our savings, our pensions, everything was intertwined, a complex web woven over decades. Untangling it seemed like an impossible Herculean task. And what would be left for me? A lonely old man in a smaller, emptier house with half the money I had worked my entire life to save. Would that be a victory? Or just a different kind of defeat? But how could I stay? Every time I looked at her, I saw her with him. Her touch, which had once been my greatest comfort, now made my skin crawl. Her apologies, her tears, her pleas for forgiveness, they all sounded like noise from a television in another room, meaningless and distant. The love I had for her, the great towering edifice of my life, had been reduced to a pile of rubble, and I didn't know if I had the strength or the will to rebuild it. The presence of Mark next door was a constant, unrelenting torture. I became a prisoner in my own home. I'd peek through the blinds before going outside, checking to see if he was in his yard. I changed my routines, going for walks early in the morning or late at night to avoid seeing him. I felt like a hunted animal in my own territory. One Saturday, he was having one of his barbecues. The sound of his booming laugh and the cheerful chatter of his guests drifted over the fence, a sickening soundtrack to my misery. The smell of grilled meat filled the air, the same smell that used to signal happy summer evenings, now turning my stomach. I couldn't take it. I got in my car and just drove, with no destination in mind. I drove for hours until the suburban landscape gave way to open country. I ended up by a lake, the water still and dark under the setting sun. I sat there until long after nightfall, the loneliness a cold, heavy presence beside me. It was a loneliness I had never known before. Even when I was by myself, I had never been truly alone. I had always carried Elena with me, a warm, comforting presence in my heart. Now, that space was just a cold, aching void. I was utterly, completely, and irrevocably alone. The life I had known was over, and I had no idea what was supposed to come next. The months that followed the initial explosion were a long, slow grind. The raw, searing pain of the discovery began to cool, hardening into a dense, heavy stone of resentment that I carried in my chest. Sarah stayed for 2 weeks, a fierce, protective lioness guarding a wounded father. She acted as a buffer between me and Elena, her anger a shield that I hid behind. She cooked for me, made sure I was eating, and spent hours just sitting with me in the living room, the silence between us more comforting than any words could be. Her presence was a balm, but it was also a temporary one. She had her own life, her own family, hundreds of miles away. The day she left, the silence in the house rushed back in, heavier and more oppressive than before. Elena, for her part, seemed to be shrinking. The vibrant, confident woman I had married was replaced by a pale, timid ghost who tiptoed around the house, her eyes perpetually red-rimmed. She had cut off all contact with Mark. He and Carol had put their house up for sale a month after Sarah's visit. The news brought me a fleeting sense of relief, the thought of not having to see his face every day a small mercy. But the damage was done. His leaving wouldn't erase the memories or stitch back together the trust that had been shredded. Elena tried to make amends in the only way she knew how. She filled the house with my favorite things, the scent of baking bread, the classical music I liked to listen to in the evenings, the latest biography of a president she knew I'd want to read. They were peace offerings, pathetic attempts to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. But her efforts felt like trying to put a bandage on a gaping wound. They were superficial, meaningless. She was trying to recreate the life we had, but that life was gone. She had murdered it in a cheap motel room on our 50th anniversary. One evening, she came to me as I sat on the porch, a glass of whiskey in my hand, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance. She held a large photo album in her hands. It was one of our oldest, its leather cover worn and soft with age. "Frank," she said, her voice tentative, can we just look at this together?" I didn't answer, so she sat in the chair opposite me and opened it to the first page. There we were, two impossibly young people, squinting in the sun on our wedding day. We looked so happy, so full of a naive, unshakable belief in our future. As she turned the pages, a panorama of our life together unfolded. The birth of our children, their first steps, their first days of school, family vacations, Christmases, birthdays. A lifetime of shared moments captured in glossy, fading squares. "Remember this?" she would whisper, pointing to a photo. "Michael was so sick on that trip to the Grand Canyon, you carried him almost the whole way." Or, "Look at Sarah's face. She was so proud of that science fair trophy." I remembered it all, and that was the problem. These memories, once a source of warmth and joy, were now agonizing. They were artifacts from a life I now knew was a partial lie. As I looked at these photos of her, smiling at me, her arm around my waist, I couldn't help but wonder, what was she thinking in that moment? Was her love for me real, or was it just a comfortable habit? Was I a fool for having believed it so completely? "It wasn't all a lie, Frank," she said, as if reading my thoughts. Her voice was thick with unshed tears. "Please, you have to believe me. I loved you. I still love you. What I did, it was a madness, a terrible, selfish madness. But it wasn't our whole life." I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. It would have been so much easier to accept her version of events, to file the affair away as a temporary aberration, an anomaly in an otherwise happy story. But I couldn't. The betrayal had fundamentally altered my perception of reality. It was like discovering that a painting you had admired your whole life had a grotesque, ugly image hidden beneath the surface. You could never look at it the same way again. The for sale sign in Mark and Carol's yard was replaced by a sold sign. I watched from my window as the moving trucks came and went. I never saw Mark again. Carol came over the day before they left. She gave me a brief, awkward hug. "I wish you peace, Frank," she said, and I knew she meant it. She was another victim in this sorry mess. Her own retirement dreams turned to dust. I wondered what her future would hold, if she would find a way to forgive him, or if she would walk away. I found I didn't have the energy to care. My own emotional landscape was a barren wasteland. I had nothing left for anyone else. The departure of the neighbors didn't bring the closure I had hoped for. The house next door stood empty for a few weeks, a silent, dark reminder. Then a new family moved in, a young couple with a toddler. The sounds of a young family, a child's laughter, the squeak of a tricycle on the sidewalk filled the air. It was a sound that should have been cheerful, but to me it was just a reminder of a life that was now in my past, a time when our own house was filled with such noises. I felt ancient, a relic from a bygone era. My son, Michael, kept calling. "Dad, you have to make a decision," he'd say, his voice firm but patient. "You can't live in this limbo forever. It's eating you alive." He was right. I was withering, decaying from the inside out. The anger that had sustained me for months was beginning to burn itself out, leaving behind only a fine gray ash of exhaustion and despair. I had to do something. I had to choose a path. One morning I woke up before dawn. I got dressed and went downstairs. Alina was asleep in our old bedroom. I hadn't slept in that room since the night I found out. I stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at her. In sleep, she looked peaceful, vulnerable. The lines of stress and sorrow on her face were smoothed away. For a moment, she looked like the girl I had fallen in love with. A wave of profound, gut-wrenching sadness washed over me. It wasn't anger, it wasn't hatred. It was just a deep, sorrowful ache for what we had lost, for what she had thrown away. I went out to the garage and looked at the half-finished bookshelf. I ran my hand over the smooth, sanded oak. I had designed it to hold the books we would collect on our travels, travel books, photo albums, novels we would read aloud to each other. A repository for the memories we were supposed to make in our golden years. I knew then what I had to do. Later that morning, I sat down with Alina at the kitchen table. It was the first time we had sat there together in months. I told her I wasn't going to divorce her. I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, a desperate, pathetic thing. I quickly extinguished it. "I'm not staying with you because I forgive you," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. I don't know if I ever can. I'm staying for practical reasons. We're too old to start over. Our lives are too entangled. And frankly, I've worked too damn hard my entire life to see half of it walk out the door. I laid out my terms. We would live in the same house, but as roommates. We would be civil for the sake of the children and our own sanity. But the marriage, the love, the intimacy, that was over. There would be no more shared bed, no more I love yous, no more anniversary celebrations. The life we had planned, the trips to Tuscany and Japan, the quiet evenings on the porch swing, all of it was canceled. "You wanted to feel seen, Alina?" I said, the bitterness I thought was gone rising in my throat. "Well, I see you now. I see you for exactly what you are, and I don't want to be married to that person anymore." Her face crumpled, the last vestiges of hope dying in her eyes. She started to cry, quiet, hopeless tears. But this time, her tears didn't move me. They were just the consequence of her own actions. She had made her bed in that cheap motel room. Now she had to lie in it, and so did I. That was 6 months ago. We live in our gilded cage, two strangers rattling around in a house full of memories. It is a quiet, lonely existence. I started working in my workshop again. I finished the bookshelf. It stands in the living room, empty. I spend most of my time out there, losing myself in the smell of sawdust and the rhythm of my work. I'm building things again, small things, a birdhouse, a jewelry box for Sarah. It's not the life I dreamed of, not even close. The joy I had anticipated in my retirement is gone, replaced by a quiet, resigned sense of purpose. Sometimes in the evening, I see Alina sitting on the porch swing alone, watching the sunset. I wonder what she thinks about. Does she regret what she did? Does she mourn the life we lost? Or does she sometimes think of him? I don't ask. I don't want to know. I have my own sunsets to watch now. I take my whiskey and sit on the back steps, looking out at the yard. The peony bushes I hacked down have started to grow back, new green shoots pushing up through the ravaged soil. A part of me wants to dig them up, to eradicate them completely, but I leave them. They are a reminder that some things, once broken, can never be truly whole again. They just grow around the damage, scarred and changed. The dream of the golden years is dead. This is my reality now. This long, slow, quiet twilight. It is a life sentence in a way, a punishment for a crime I didn't commit. I survived the betrayal, but I will never, ever be the same. The sun is setting on my life, and I am watching it alone. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear from you what moment in your life made you see someone for who they truly were. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Reddit Whispers, where the real stories get told.